"You're a criminal now," said the wealthy man to his surgeon wife, who had been fired for theft, as he filed for divorce. But just as she started to speak in court, "Darling, go to bed without me, I'll be late." A scheduled surgery turned into an emergency. Again. A disgruntled sigh came through the receiver. "Jessica, how are you going to see me off?" "The usual way, William. 3 hours of sleep will do. Don't worry. We won't see each other for over a week. Will you set your alarm? Good night." The line went dead. Wearily adjusting her glasses, she leaned on the windowsill. "Jessica, are you crying?" The voice of a young nurse made her jump. "No, Adela, just got something in my eye." "I see, but you hang in there." Adela awkwardly patted Jessica's shoulder, more out of formality than comfort. "The chief is calling for you. Said it's urgent. Tell him I'll come after the operation." Adela shook her head and headed to the patient's room, while Jessica headed to the operating theater. Inside, interns awaited her, some to assist, others to observe the young mentor. Jessica Miller, one of the interns, said as she washed her hands. "Did you always want to be a doctor?" "A surgeon, Alexa, a surgeon. Honestly, as a child, I wanted to be a veterinarian. We had this kind-hearted person in our town who organized an animal care club. We bandaged paws, stopped bleeding." "And you, ever second-guess your choice?" "A little. I love the work, but I never imagined how tough it is psychologically." "I understand." Jessica gently nudged the intern's shoulder. "But if you decide to leave, the world will lose some of its most beautiful stitches." With these words, Jessica entered the operating room and, as usual, raised her hands for her gloves. Nurses rushed over with her gown, preparing her for surgery. "Good evening, colleagues. Tonight, we have a heart transplant. The organ is ready." Jessica pointed to the table with the box. "Has Surgeon Sam arrived or—" Jessica Miller, a gruff male voice, interrupted her mid-sentence. "I asked you to come to my office. Calvin Morrison, we have surgery. Can it wait until later?" Jessica Miller. A man without a gown entered the operating room and approached Jessica. "As long as I'm in charge here, kindly respond promptly when called," he said with a disdainful tone that Jessica immediately caught onto. If he didn't hesitate to scold me in front of the interns, something must really be wrong, she thought nervously, biting her lip. "Calvin Morrison, why are you being like this?" "It's important for the interns to look up to me as an authority if I'm to mentor them." Jessica tried to be friendly. "That doesn't matter now." He leaned back in his chair, fingers interlocked. "Jessica Miller, the youngest surgeon ever allowed to practice independently, and this happens in your first year." A shiver ran down her spine. Jessica still thought it might be affected pomp and just a typical trait of the head surgeon. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "What's there to understand? Staff saw you take expensive drugs from storage. And your reputation took a nosedive after that surgery." Jessica's mouth hung open. It all seemed more like a tasteless joke. She didn't know which question to ask first, so she silently sunk into her chair. "Nothing to say?" The head surgeon smirked. "I took you under my wing, and now this." "I don't understand what you mean. All my surgeries have been successful, and I haven't even touched the drugs. Nurses prepare them in advance. There are witnesses about the drugs. And here's your signed report on the table." Jessica glanced at the thin folder in front of her. Inside was indeed her signed report: paralysis of the lower body due to a medical error. But she hadn't operated on this patient. "But I don't even know this person." Tears started welling up in her eyes. "Let's figure this out, please." "Jessica Miller, I could have forgiven the drug theft, a few deductions from your salary, a reprimand, that's it. But risking people's lives and hiding it from me. You're suspended." He lowered his voice, making it sound threatening. "Leave quietly. I could report this." Jessica covered her mouth with her hand and rushed out of the office. She couldn't remember how she called a taxi and got home. She only came to her senses sitting in the hallway when her groggy husband came out to meet her. "I've told you so many times, Jessica, I sleep lightly, I hear every little noise. Why did you wake me up?" But she didn't respond, just hugged her knees tighter. You're crying? What happened?" "William, I'm being accused of a crime." Jessica cried out, sobbing even harder. "They said I stole drugs and there's a signed report on some surgery." Her husband's face changed. William sat down next to her, nervously scanning the floor. Are you going to prison?" "Oh my God, don't exaggerate." Jessica waved her hands. "They have no evidence against me, though I did write to a friend who's a lawyer. It looks like the whole team is against you. I told you not to bite off more than you can chew." Jessica felt tension building inside her. Why wasn't he supporting her? She attributed her husband's behavior to sleepiness and stress before his next business trip, so to avoid escalating things, she hurriedly went to bed. She slept poorly. The next morning, she refused to see him off, since she had a genuine reason. Fortunately, her lawyer friend responded quickly and explained that returning to work now would be pointless, the police might be called. So Jessica had no choice but to keep herself busy to avoid going crazy from stress. During periods of high stress, she found solace in cleaning. A month of work without long breaks had left plenty of tasks around the apartment, so Jessica took out her bucket and rag, if you could call it pleasure now. Wiping dust from the sideboard, her gaze fell on a childhood photo. "Graduation," Jessica whispered, sinking into memories. "It's a shame you didn't live to see it, Mom." Tears welled up in her eyes again. Memories of frequent moves, her perpetually drunk father, and Jessica, who had to cover her ears because of her parents' shouts, came flooding back. She recalled working as a cleaner at the age of 13 instead of her mother, since no one would officially risk hiring such a fragile child for such heavy work. And now here she was again, scrubbing floors, albeit in her own apartment. Next was a photo from the wedding, the first year of university studies, her first love. William was studying economics, but his studies didn't interest him much. They met by chance. Jessica accidentally spilled coffee on him while wiping her glasses on the go and crashing into him headlong. Apologizing, she grabbed a napkin and started blotting the stains off William's pristine white shirt, though it didn't immediately occur to her that Jessica was tactlessly touching a stranger. Nevertheless, her behavior didn't repulse him, even though her ears were as red as beets at the time. Jessica quickly wiped the cups and medals she had received during her schooling and university education, after which she continued cleaning in other rooms. The day passed unnoticed, and closer to evening, the phone rang. "Hello, Jessica, hi," a cheerful voice on the other end of the line made her smile. "I've read all your messages. The case is clearly fabricated, but by whom? Do you have jealous colleagues, enemies, maybe at work?" "Hi, Stella, you're asking. I got in the knot through connections, like they love to do in our hospital. I won the quota. People there work for 10 years as regular doctors, and here comes a young surgeon right away." Jessica and Stella had known each other since their student days. Both loved to study, and that's how they became friends. They were even called the golden couple of the university, always taking first place in all competitions and performances. The girls lived together in the same dormitory and easily found common ground, staying in touch over the years to prevent their friendship from fading due to distance. "Well, that explains everything, my dear. I feel like you've shed a lot of tears there. But I still need to ask. Okay, about the medications, it's fine. Those testimonies are strange. The court won't listen." "What?" Jessica jumped. "You think there will be a trial?" "You know, Jessica, I'm considering all options. Maybe we'll manage without a trial. As for the documents, it's simple. We'll send them for examination, let them discover the forged signature." "Stella," Jessica hesitated, "the thing is, it is my signature. I recognized it by the curl in the middle. But I didn't operate on this person, I would have remembered." "Yeah, that complicates things, But there will be an examination anyway. Anyway, we'll send it for verification, you never know. The friend switched to something more mundane, and a few minutes later Jessica hung up. Stella gave her hope that everything would be fine, and so she felt much better. But just as Jessica headed to the kitchen, she heard her mobile vibrating again. Hello, William, hi. I thought you wouldn't call today. I seem to have some hope here. Hi. Have you been reinstated at work? No, but my friend is determined. If a court summons comes, she'll help. We'll handle it. What court? You said you wouldn't be jailed, he protested. William, why? Why are you saying this? Your mood scares me. You know what, Jessica, this was the last straw for me. William's tone suddenly changed sharply. First, you just stopped coming home in the evenings, and then you started staying out until night. Now you've got legal issues too. Tell me honestly, have you taken a lover and wanted to hide it from me? Have you lost your mind, William? How dare you say such things? I've given my all to our family, bought the apartment, even put it in your name. I'm always there, even if the opportunity to be physically present isn't as frequent. You've changed a lot, Jessica. Always tired at home, looking unkempt, but at work, with makeup and lashes, everything is always perfect. Anyway, I'm tired of this. Go live with your lover and strip the hospital. I'll take my things by the end of the week. William. But Jessica's cry went unheard. Her legs immediately weakened, and she collapsed onto the bed. A tremor shook her so intensely that it seemed like it would never end. 5 years of living together, during which she never even glanced at other men, and her husband dumped her like a teenage girl over the phone. He lacked the courage to discuss it face to face, especially at such a time. Only deep breathing exercises helped her calm down, and even then, it took about 30 minutes. But Jessica couldn't be described as calm. Everything in the apartment weighed heavily on her. She wanted to leave this place as soon as possible, where every corner reminded her of William. Running out onto the street in her casual clothes and slippers, she felt a wave of calmness. The summer evening turned out to be cool, but Jessica didn't notice. Tearful, she sat on a bench in the park, wrapped in her pajamas. Tired passers-by shuffled by, their workdays having just ended. Couples strolled by, and mothers with strollers passed, while somewhere beyond the park, children's laughter rang out. Suddenly, a child's cry mixed with tears broke the air, followed immediately by an anxious mother rushing to their side. So that's why William always avoided talking about children, Jessica smirked, gazing up at the sky. Wonder how I can make this day even worse? She had barely closed her eyes when an unpleasant rumbling erupted in her stomach, not due to hunger. Spotting a nearby trash bin, Jessica promptly deposited her recent dinner. Instant suspicions flooded her mind, fueled by strange coincidences. Yet Jessica only smiled, attributing her condition to the stress she had endured. The cold began to overwhelm her, prompting her to stand up from the bench and finally head back home. She contemplated renting a room for the night, just to avoid staying in the apartment she shared with William. "Mama!" Jessica exclaimed when she noticed a small bloody stain where she had been sitting. Convinced she understood everything correctly, she quickly ran to her car and drove to the hospital. Her hands automatically turned the steering wheel toward her clinic. Retrieving her pass, Jessica discovered it wasn't working. Despite futile attempts to swipe her card, she confirmed it was deactivated. "Jessica Miller, something wrong with your pass," an elderly security guard emerged with his card. "Let me open that for you." "Thank you." Jessica gave him a grateful look and hurried to the gynecologist's office. "You're a doctor, Jessica. You know you shouldn't be nervous during these early weeks. And you didn't schedule a visit to the gynecologist. Career is one thing, but since you and William planned this child." The gynecologist heard Jessica sniffle. Handing her a tissue, she saw Jessica couldn't hold back her tears anymore. "Oh my God, what happened?" The colleague asked worriedly, offering another tissue. "Oh, it's just Tears of joy, Jessica forced a smile, wiping her face. The term is still early, the doctor cautiously remarked. I can schedule you for. No need, Jessica interrupted, raising her hand. Thank you, everything is really fine. Remembering the recommendations, she left the hospital and got into her car. She was shaking again, but now there was an added chill. At 22, Jessica had terminated a pregnancy she shared with William. When he found out about her pregnancy, he left her to deal with the problem alone. There was no one to support Jessica, so she made that decision. Everything went well, but the event left an indelible mark on her memory. William returned weeks later, persuading Jessica to terminate the pregnancy, citing reasons like her rapidly growing career, lack of her own apartment, and so forth. And now Jessica had her own apartment, a car, a good job, and savings for a rainy day. But even that wasn't enough to keep William. My God, what are you punishing me for? She asked, falling asleep right in the car. Jessica woke in the middle of the night to the sound of a truck laying asphalt, which also reached her car. She realized she couldn't handle this alone and scrolled through her contacts. Calling Stella, Jessica found her mobile unanswered. No one else to call, Jessica concluded, starting the car. She got home well past midnight, took a shower, and immediately fell asleep. Exhaustion overpowered her emotions. She wanted to fall asleep very quickly. The next morning, Jessica was awakened again by a call from her friend. In tears, she shared everything that had happened with Stella. The lawyer agreed to come to her friend's aid, despite the hours it would take to get there. Trying to make breakfast, Jessica unexpectedly heard a scraping noise at the door lock. Arming herself with a frying pan, she headed to the hallway, only to find William inside. As soon as their eyes met, he received a slap, strong enough to leave a bright mark on his skin. Jessica's own palm burned, but it was as if she didn't notice. How could you come back? Take your things and get out of here. Good morning to you too, William replied, rubbing his cheek. Don't you think I should be the one leaving? After all, the apartment is registered in my name. Jessica's fingertips turned pale, but she managed to keep herself composed. Staring at her husband's face, she struggled to understand how she could have missed his awful traits all these years. How long have you been planning this, darling? Endured a whole year or couldn't find a reason to leave me? And do you think it's normal to cheat, to lie? You didn't even try to admit your infidelity. And I'm not even mentioning the real crime you committed with your accomplice. Maybe if you had been honest, we would have decided differently. You made all this up just for the apartment. You know what, it's probably for the best that I finally found out who you really are. Jessica didn't get to finish her sentence. In that instant, William shoved several photographs into her hands. In one picture, she was having a conversation with a stranger, in another, she was embracing another man, and in the third, she was kissing someone. These are our photos together. Have you completely lost your mind? Do you think I wouldn't remember? I don't understand what you're talking about, her husband managed a smile. You know, it all looks quite convincing. Jessica was speechless. She was afraid to even imagine how dangerous the person next to her had been all this time. And she was carrying this person's child. Jessica, it's over. I'm giving you until the end of this week to vacate the apartment, or else. I'll take you to court. Now get out. Rolling his eyes, William silently left the apartment. Whether there were no tears left or the pain was too intense, Jessica didn't allow herself to cry. Inside her, there was a resolve to see this through. By evening, her friend arrived, and the next day they went to get the results of the examination. It turned out the signature did indeed belong to Jessica, so the head suggested resigning to avoid ending up behind bars. Stella supported the idea, knowing their chances were slim. Besides, handling two legal battles simultaneously would be challenging. One evening, Jessica decided to go shopping. She wanted to distract herself, and her appetite was growing rapidly due to pregnancy. Passing by the fruit shelves, she suddenly felt someone sharply grab her shoulder. Well, hello there, daughter-in-law. The brazen female voice made her turn around. Spent the best years of my son's life and now strolling around the shops, huh? Clara Nelson was yet another unpleasant event in Jessica's life. When William's mother found out her son had secretly married a girl without parents or dowry, she flew into a rage. How many times had she tested Jessica's strength? And now she was looking at this spiteful, unpleasant woman whose eyes exuded triumph, wondering what she had done it all for. Clara Nelson, I never expected to see you here, Jessica genuinely expressed surprise. You live a couple of kilometers away. How did you end up here? Oh, just taking a stroll. You haven't changed the subject. Aren't you ashamed? Acting all righteous and capable. You never bothered to come to me, always too busy with your studies. Clara Nelson, I knew I would never please you. Can we stop talking now? Jessica said wearily, realizing the conversation would lead nowhere good. We can. But I want to warn you, my dear, don't get too comfortable in the apartment with your girlfriend. Nothing will come out of it. All the papers are in William's name. Ah, so you already know about my friend. Maybe the fake photos are your doing too, Clara Nelson? Mocking me, are you? Just wait. You'll end up with nothing to crawling on your knees. Thank God, at least there are no children from you. With that, her mother-in-law disgustingly removed her hand from Jessica's shoulder and headed towards the exit. Jessica didn't make a sound until the front door closed behind her. Only when she was sure Clara Nelson couldn't see her did she let her emotions take over and started to cry. The next day, Jessica registered at the gynecologist's office. She tried to sneak into the hospital unnoticed, always wearing hoodies with a hood. But the work community was like a small village. Soon, rumors spread among all the doctors about her pregnancy, as well as her sudden dismissal. Everyone knew about the divorce and the division of the apartment. This will work in our favor. Let them see you as a victim, it'll make things easier in court, Stella kept repeating, encouragingly. During the legal proceedings, Jessica was allowed to reside in the apartment. And a few weeks after Stella arrived, the first hearing took place. Of course, her friend acted as the lawyer. The strategy was simple: convince the court that the apartment had been transferred under duress by an abusive husband who constantly humiliated and beat her. It might not have been true, but Jessica and Stella decided to play the game just as William had. Jessica's appearance was an asset: red, tired eyes and a swollen face from crying. As far as I know, this judge prioritizes family values and traditions. He grants divorces minimally, only when it's clear the woman in the marriage is suffering, Stella whispered when the court session had just begun. Hope warmed Jessica's heart. She had endured many trials, and thanks to her friend's composure, she believed everything would turn out well. The hearing indeed went well. Several times, Stella mentioned that the judge was on their side and genuinely sympathized with Jessica. Why were infertility materials provided? They're irrelevant to the case. Remove them, the judge sternly addressed the defendant at the end of the session. William is infertile? Stella whispered, knowing Jessica was carrying his child. No, of course not. I think if he faked the photos, then fabricating a false certificate wouldn't have been difficult for him either. I don't understand then, why did he attach it to the case materials? Stella was surprised. Maybe the lawyer made a mistake or something, nodded Jessica, fully trusting her friend. A few seconds later, the short lawyer in round glasses sitting next to William straightened his folders and headed towards the judge, but unexpectedly stumbled on a step, causing some documents to spill from his hands. Jessica chuckled quietly, while Stella tried to maintain a serious expression. She slowly turned to her friend, showing a smile, then returned a stern look to their opponent. But for some reason, the lawyer didn't hurry to get up. When he finally stood, he first dusted off his pants, then adjusted the handkerchief in his jacket pocket. Jessica glanced at the judge, who was studiously examining the fallen papers. Upon closer inspection, she realized, among them were the forged photos showing her spending time with different men. Rising angrily, Jessica was about to step towards the fallen documents to collect them, but Stella stopped her in time. Her friend's look clearly said, "Stay put, you'll only make it worse." "It's all right, Jessica," suddenly came the irritating voice of her mother-in-law. "Don't strain yourself. Andrew Oliver will pick everything up himself. After all, you're pregnant." Hearing this, the judge abruptly shifted his gaze to the bewildered Jessica. His eyes darted between the photos and her. Though her pregnancy was still in its early stages and her stomach wasn't showing much, the judge's expression indicated that a narrative was forming in his mind, clearly not in Jessica's favor. "How do they know?" she asked, returning to her seat. "Could it be that William has acquaintances even among my former colleagues?" "Are you suggesting that?" Stella whispered but hesitated to voice her thought aloud. Jessica realized, if William knew about her pregnancy, it must have been from someone who saw her at work, meaning he was well acquainted with this particular person. The thought that William might have been involved in fabricating false evidence against her scared her deeply. When she looked back at Stella, she saw the same concern in her eyes. Deciding not to pursue this thought further, Jessica tried to regain a calm demeanor as much as possible after what had just happened. The court retired to the deliberation room and issued a decision denying Jessica's claims. The apartment was declared William's property, necessitating immediate eviction. There was no strength left to hold back the tears. Clutching herself, Jessica rushed out of the courtroom to the restroom and began to cry loudly and bitterly. "Jessica," Stella knocked on the stall where she was sitting. "We need to go." Taking her by the elbow, her friend led her out of the courthouse. As soon as they reached the parking lot, the lawyer covered her face with her hands and burst into tears. "Jessica, forgive me, forgive me. I'm so sorry I gave you false hope. I tried my best, but those fake photos. The judge is supposed to be impartial, but this one seems like a real moralist. We'll appeal, take it to the highest court," she tried to justify herself, still not removing her hands from her face. Jessica. The last thing she remembered before losing consciousness was her friend's worried face, the only person who genuinely wished her well. Jessica woke up in a hospital bed. 4 drips were attached to her hand, and Stella was asleep on the chair next to her. Judging by her appearance, she had spent the whole night there. "Stella, where am I? What happened?" Jessica whispered, afraid to wake the other patients. "Huh, what?" Her friend startled, dropping her paper cup of coffee. The drink spilled on the floor, and because of the noise, the other disgruntled patients stared at them. "What happened? Why am I here?" "Everything's fine, and that's what matters. Just don't panic. You had a threatened miscarriage, but they saved the baby. Honestly, my gynecologist drove me nuts with notes about taking care of yourself, eliminating stress from your life. Are they all like that?" The friends laughed, forgetting that they might be judged by the other patients. Jessica glanced out the window, where bright sunlight streamed in. Suddenly, she felt a sense of peace, as if something that had been pulling her back, her apartment, job, and William, had been removed from her life. Yes, she carried her ex-husband's child in her heart, but this child was hers and hers alone. By the way, William stopped by. He said he doesn't believe any of this nonsense. Apparently, they even called an ambulance on purpose. "You're such a good actress. I always thought your ex-husband was strange, but to go to such lengths. He's in the past now. I need to move forward, especially now that I have a little one," Jessica replied, stroking her stomach. "Aren't you going to apply for child support? Every little bit helps." Jessica shook her head. She felt that William's connections were so extensive that in the end, she would be the one paying child support. "Stella, will I manage?" she asked her friend uncertainly. "You'll manage. I've never met anyone stronger than you, Jessica," she placed her hand on her elbow. "But I'll still file an appeal against the decision." But all subsequent appeals were thwarted, as Stella learned, by the efforts of Clara Nelson. Her mother-in-law's partner had enough means to prevent the case from moving forward. Plus, the judges all know him, greet him, shake his hand. Jessica decided to use the emergency funds she had set aside for a rental apartment. According to her calculations, it was only enough for a studio, as now she was being turned down for work in state clinics. She had to thank the head doctor for this, who had reduced her professional reputation to zero. Stella soon left. Clients were already unhappy with her extended vacation. But Jessica was grateful to her friend for not abandoning her during what was probably the most difficult period of her life. Pregnancy seemed to amplify all the stress Jessica had experienced, making it very difficult for her. She couldn't go a day without nausea, and dizziness became a constant companion. She started visiting the maternity clinic more often, but all she heard was, "Fill your life with peace." But where could peace come from for someone whose life had taken a sharp turn several years ago? For the 100th time, scrolling through her emails in search of at least one approved application, Jessica stumbled upon an invitation. A private clinic had opened a few kilometers from her home, looking for a specialist in providing medical services at home. While applicants needed their own transport, the pay was decent. Unable to believe her eyes, Jessica called the number provided in the invitation and rushed to the interview an hour later. "Hello, Jessica Miller. You have an excellent resume. With such skills, you could work in the best clinics in the city, yet you want to go on calls in your own car, and at an early stage of pregnancy," the director exclaimed, flipping through documents. Jessica looked attentively at her. The woman was around 40, dressed sharply, with a network of fine wrinkles under her eyes. For some reason, Jessica felt that being open with this director would be the right move. "I was set up at the state hospital, and the head spread rumors among other medical institutions. I'm speaking openly about this because I know I didn't do anything like that," Jessica said. The director shifted her gaze from the documents to Jessica, but there was something off-putting in that look. "My intuition was wrong. I should have stayed silent. Now they definitely won't hire me," Jessica thought, sadly lowering her head. "Our branch in this city opened recently, so I'm not familiar with other doctors," said the director, smiling broadly. "For me, professionalism is the only thing that matters. So, if you're ready to start tomorrow—" "Yes," Jessica interrupted. "I'm ready, thank you." She sniffled, feeling that a streak of good luck should finally come her way. She began working as a visiting physician, responding to calls from patients at home with just a phone call. Most of them were wealthy, and Jessica sometimes felt that for them, it was just entertainment, like when their son had a slightly warmer forehead than usual or scraped his knee playing in the garden. It was difficult for her to come to terms with the fact that this fairy tale life was something she had always dreamed of, persistently striving toward for several years. Sometimes Jessica would visit the central office and stay there on duty. She quickly made friends with a group of young doctors thanks to her work with interns. Soon, the girls from the group started inviting her to impromptu tea parties in the break room, and the guys always held the door for her. Once, while hurrying between offices in the corridor, Jessica noticed nurses animatedly discussing something on the phone. "Whose pictures are you looking at, girls?" "You're smiling so mysteriously," Jessica joined in the conversation, also smiling broadly. "Oh, it's my friend from the Central Hospital with her new boyfriend. He's handsome, tall. They say he's divorced." "How did she manage to snatch him up so quickly?" the redhead nurse replied, scrolling through photos. "Maybe they were already seeing each other while his wife was still around," another nurse said, emphasizing the last word. "She's had everything handed to her in life, honestly. A position as a nurse in the Central Hospital of the city, and she just finished college," added the third nurse. "Why is that?" Jessica asked, surprised, remembering how she had been disliked because of her rapid career growth. "Well, she's the director's niece, but her parents are wealthy too. Spoon-fed all her life. I never understood why she even bothered to work. Boredom. Definitely boredom." "Well, show me him, show me," the third nurse demanded, reaching out for the phone. Jessica looked closely at the screen and immediately exclaimed, "I know her. That's Adela, my former colleague. Very pretty, caring. She used to share lunches with me. Though she does tend to overdo it with salt." She used to bring documents for me to sign when I was working late. What a shame. It's been so long since we've seen each other, otherwise. But before Jessica could finish, the nurse holding the phone finally scrolled to the picture of Adela's boyfriend. Tears immediately streamed down Jessica's cheeks. Pressing her hand to her mouth to stifle a scream of heart-wrenching pain, she quickly walked toward the restroom. Oh, Jessica was really impressed by him. Looks like her type, the redhead nurse said, watching her departing colleague. Inside the restroom, Jessica couldn't even reach the stall, slowly sliding down the wall. Adela and William, Adela and William. She repeated in a trembling voice. So that's it. She warmed a snake to her breast. So that's why Calvin Morrison didn't even try to listen to me. And that employee who reported the stolen drugs was found. How long have they been planning this? Jessica kicked the trash can as hard as she could, spilling most of its contents. Oh God, when will all this end? I can't take it anymore, she cried out, covering her face with her hands. It took several weeks for Jessica to come to terms with thoughts of William's brazen and perverse betrayal. Trying to focus more on work, she began taking home consultations. Thanks to her education, she even started tutoring medical interns, explaining complex topics in simple terms. One morning at 6 o'clock, she was called to a nearby house. Quickly gathering her things and cursing whoever had decided to follow so early, Jessica hurried to the patient's home. Knocking on the door of the designated apartment, she checked the contents of her medical bag once again. Suddenly, the door swung open so abruptly that it lightly slapped her forehead. Are you Jessica Miller? Asked a 30-year-old man, looking concernedly from head to toe. Oh my, I'm sorry, I'm just a bundle of nerves. Do you need some ice? He offered. Yes, please, nodded Jessica, stepping over the threshold. And I also need to be shown where the patient is. Of course, he said, leading her to the living room and then hurrying to the kitchen. On the bed, dressed in thoroughly soaked clothes, lay a pale elderly woman, barely sighing. Next to her, Jessica found a glucose meter. Everything clicked in her mind, and she started looking for test strips in her bag. Excuse me, where are the glucose test strips? What? What strips? I don't live here. I was called to fix some furniture, the man exclaimed, rushing out of the kitchen holding a frozen meat piece in a bag. I couldn't find any ice, but this thing seems cold too. Will this do? Jessica gave him the most bewildered look and returned to her search for the test strips. Fortunately, a fresh pack was already inside. Find her address book on the dresser in the hallway. Grandmas usually keep those things there, Jessica instructed. Are you suggesting I go through someone else's belongings? The stranger raised his eyebrows in surprise. I could get into trouble for this. Listen, Jessica said sternly, I couldn't care less about your rules. Do you want to help or not? If yes, then there should be contact numbers for her neighbor, daughter, son, or someone like that. We need to inform them that their mom needs constant care. Meanwhile, Jessica measured the patient's blood sugar level, found a syringe, administered an injection, and then proceeded with a general assessment of her condition. Why didn't you just call an ambulance? Why bother with a private clinic? Jessica asked. Well, I have a friend who used to work there, an ex-expert. I value this job, you know? So I thought that by the time the ambulance arrives, something irreversible might happen. Is everyone in this town connected somehow? Jessica muttered, putting a blood pressure cuff on the elderly woman. Here, found it, the man exclaimed, entering the room with a piece of paper in hand. But upon seeing the cuff, syringe, and test strips, his legs unexpectedly gave way, and he collapsed to the floor before Jessica could even react. Did you get nervous or something? She said, getting up from the bed. Carefully palpating the patient's abdomen, she realized there was a lump on the right side. Well, we definitely can't do without an ambulance here, she concluded, pulling out her phone. Within a few minutes, a paramedic arrived. Jessica accompanied him to the hospital. In the ambulance, suspicion of appendicitis was confirmed. She scolded herself for not noticing the man's condition immediately, his flushed face, sweating, nervousness. "You're losing your grip, Jessica," she thought as they transported the patient to surgery. 40 minutes later, as expected, he was moved to a room. The doctor began explaining in detail what had happened, but paused when Jessica finished his sentence with a smile. Stepping into the room, Jessica saw the man, now awake from anesthesia. He immediately sat up when he noticed her. "Please, lie down," Jessica said, gently sitting on the edge of the bed. "The surgery went well, but the stitches are still fresh," she informed him. "Jessica, you're my savior," he said emotionally, squeezing her hand. "We arrived for one call, but you ended up helping 2 people. I'm sorry I didn't go looking for that notebook right away. I've only been at this firm for a little over a month. I was afraid I'd get fired." "Yeah, we seem to be alike," she smiled. "I stick to my work too, but my calling is to heal people, to save them. And I couldn't care less about anything else if I can't help anyone. Jessica, perhaps you'll allow me to make up for my mistake and invite you somewhere," he pleaded, looking into her eyes. Jessica hadn't expected this turn. Only now did she realize she had jumped into the ambulance without a second thought to support a stranger. Glancing at his face again, Jessica noted to herself that the man was quite handsome. "I'm not sure, I'll have to think about it," she replied, already knowing her decision. "You speak as though you'll refuse." "Jessica, this is just to show my gratitude, nothing more." "Oh well, what have I got to lose? It's been ages since I've been anywhere," she thought, putting a smile back on her face. "By the way, I'm Sam," the man smiled, extending his hand. Sam turned out to be very kind, caring, a former police officer. He had to leave the force due to an injury and had been trying different jobs for about a year. It turned out he had noticed Jessica's slightly protruding belly. But upon hearing her story, he was even more sympathetic. A couple of months of getting to know Sam led to him asking her out. One night, Jessica woke up from a terrible dream where she was chased by an unknown figure in a dark forest. She ran and ran, dodging sharp branches, scratching her hands and face. But the forest seemed endless. Finally, she saw a saving light within reach, but woke up drenched in sweat and short of breath. She never found out if she managed to escape that horrible place. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen, radiating through her lower back. Realizing she was going into labor, she called an ambulance and immediately phoned Sam so she wouldn't be alone. They met at the hospital. Sam wanted to hold her hand during labor, but she declined. The clinic explained Jessica wouldn't be able to deliver naturally, she needed a C-section. That's when she started worrying, but the doctors reassured her everything would be fine. "It's a boy." Quickly to the neonatal ward, the doctor announced. "What? Where's my boy, Edwin?" Jessica asked anxiously, as she hadn't even seen her baby. "He's having trouble breathing," the nurse answered sympathetically, peering into her face. "We'll be ventilating his lungs artificially until we understand what's going on." As soon as they took the baby away, Sam burst into the room. Seeing Jessica's worried face, he immediately asked the nurse what was happening. "Sam, please help our baby," Jessica clung to him as he approached. "I'm begging you, save Edwin. I'll do everything." "Don't worry, rest for now." He tightly squeezed her hand and hurried after the doctors. A few minutes later, Jessica was transferred to her room and given a sedative through the 4 to help her sleep. Edwin was diagnosed with a complex syndrome requiring surgical intervention. Jessica only learned this the next morning when she asked to hold her baby, but instead, they wheeled in a special incubator, strictly prohibiting her from opening it. Treatment was possible, but when Jessica learned the cost of the surgery, she nearly lost consciousness again. Her savings barely covered half of the required amount. She blamed herself for what had happened. The stress had almost caused several miscarriages. But what could she have done when fate had been so unfair to her? Yet another wound pierced her already weary heart upon hearing about her baby's health. Sam arrived later that evening, delayed from work, and Jessica tearfully told him everything, unsure of what to do next. He listened silently and, after a pause, said, "Jessica, I have to confess something to you." "What?" Jessica's voice trembled, just as things were beginning to improve. "I recently inherited something from my uncle. He was always reclusive, but he was fond of me since childhood. It's a small apartment in another city, but if I sell it, we could get some money." "No, don't!" Jessica shouted. "You being here is already the greatest gift you could ever give." To this, he just smiled, and Jessica herself didn't understand why she was refusing the money. She feared it might be a test. But how could she experiment with her child's health? "Jessica, I'm doing this because I love you," Sam calmly said, stroking her head. Tears flowed from the young mother's eyes with renewed intensity. That evening, she made a momentous decision to let a new person into her life. After William, she had been afraid to trust anyone except herself and her close friend, but Sam had proven everything through his actions. He quickly found a realtor and sold the apartment within a couple of weeks. The money raised went towards Edwin's surgery, and soon he began to recover. They moved in with Sam, who did everything he could to help Jessica, caring for the baby as if he were his own. Sam adored children. Growing up with two younger sisters had instilled in him a deep love for them. He had never felt such harmony in a relationship before, understanding her without words, always coming to her aid, and even giving Jessica the chance to rest from baby care after work. For this reason, Jessica decided to reveal the full story of her dismissal from the city hospital. She was no longer afraid that the truth might push him away. But when Sam learned the whole story, he flew into a rage. "Why didn't you tell me immediately that you were set up?" "I thought you wouldn't believe me," Jessica replied, perplexed, rocking her son in her arms. "I was convinced that the story about the cheater with the accomplice sounded much more believable than what actually happened." "Do you have pictures of these people?" "Yes, of course." Jessica took out her phone and scrolled to the relevant picture. "But why do you need them?" "It's too late to prove anything now." Sam shook his head. He was determined to clear William and Adela's names no matter what. His experience infiltrating criminal groups during his police work gave him an idea. The next day, without saying a word, Sam went to the Central Hospital for emergency treatment. Pretending to be ill, he insisted on being admitted to a room and waited for nightfall. Jessica was reassured that he had gone to help a friend move to another city and even asked his colleague to call her to ensure she wouldn't worry about anything. Thanks to his police work, Sam knew that all video recordings in medical institutions were kept for several years in a separate room. All he had to do was get there. Sam wasn't feeling fear for some reason. It was only pain and anger for his beloved that drove him, although it was somewhat reckless. At midnight, when the room was filled with snoring, Sam quietly slipped into the corridor and descended to the first floor. He was lucky. As he had suspected, the elderly security guard had long been asleep on duty. Reaching into the window, he retrieved the key to the room labeled Archives and hurried back upstairs. Sam had noticed the cameras earlier that day while walking down the hallway. There were plenty of them in the city's central hospital, but at the end of the corridor, they formed a blind spot. Some turned out to be dummies, non-functional, so his safe path was well planned. Unexpectedly, inside were other archives, patient records. Passing by the shelves, Sam had already thought everything was lost, but his eyes stopped at the stand labeled cameras. As he had suspected, several discs were found inside, including those dated from last summer. The next day, straight from the hospital, Sam went to the police. He reported the crime, providing all the necessary evidence. Fortunately, he still had connections from his previous job, so his colleagues immediately opened a case based on an anonymous call. In addition to the theft of drugs, the investigation also uncovered document forgery. Within a month, all charges against Jessica were dropped. Furthermore, a criminal case was initiated against the chief physician, who was promptly dismissed from his position. As compensation for moral damages, substantial sums were awarded against William and Adela, forcing her ex-husband to sell the apartment. At the trial, William publicly apologized for falsely accusing Jessica, hoping for mercy and a reduced fine. This news spread through all the newspapers of the small town, quickly restoring Jessica's reputation. Suddenly, Adela no longer needed William when she realized he had nothing left to offer: no money, no apartment, and a terrible reputation. Soon after, she shifted her attention to another candidate, without remorse, leaving William alone. Jessica couldn't believe her luck and still feared that fate might mock her again. Fortunately, luck didn't leave her. Was it because Sam was by her side or her own resilience? Life was truly beginning to improve. The new head of the department offered her a return to work, but Jessica declined, as she and Sam were preparing for their wedding and another addition to the family.